treachery, backstabbing, murder. Emmy-winning The Traitors is back for an all-new season.
Here we go again.
Join me for the ultimate game of survival, where making it to the end is a matter of life and death.
This game is torturous.
I can feel my blood pressure rise.
If you carry on with that cocky attitude, you might get yourself in trouble.
Oh, I've missed this.
The Traitors, streaming January the 9th, only on Peacock.
Welcome to No One Told Us, the podcast that tells the truth about parenting and talks about all the stuff you wish you knew before having kids. Today, I'm so excited to welcome McCall Gordon to speak on one of my very favorite topics of all time. We're going to talk about temperament and sensitivity and sleep, and McCall is such a wealth of knowledge in this field. She has a master's degree in applied psychology from Antioch with research-based specialization in infant mental health, sleep advice, and parenting culture. She also has a bachelor's in human biology from Stanford, and she's a senior lecturer in the graduate counseling psych program at Antioch. She has conducted and presented her own research on temperament, sleep, and parenting advice at infant and child development conferences around the world and has been a featured speaker at national sleep conferences. She also has a brand new book out now called Why Won't You Sleep? And I'm so excited to talk with you about this. I know so many of my listeners are going to feel very seen and heard at the end of this episode. So thank you so much for joining and welcome.
Oh, I'm just so excited to talk about this.
Me too. So like I said in the intro, this is definitely one of my favorite topics. I have a sensitive, or as you call it, Livewire child myself. And back 7 years ago, there wasn't a lot of information about this at all. At all. I had never heard of this. So I know that you kind of, were inspired by your own life and your own parenthood journey as well. Can you just talk a little bit about how you first maybe discovered that you had what you describe as a Livewire child?
Well, let's see. First, I went through labor, and then I knew.
You can tell that early, right?
You can. I mean, I say that my first child, it was 27 hours of hard. It was hard the whole time. Oh my God. And when she was born, she had to stay in the nursery just because of complications or something. And I remember them wheeling her into me in one of those little glass bassinets, and she was lying on her side, and her little eyes were like this. They weren't like that kind of fuzzy, dopey newborn. They were like this. And I remember going, that's not normal. Is it? Is that normal? Weird. Guess what? It wasn't normal, right? Because I hear it all the time. And then she had colic. So fun. And then just from then on, you could just tell she wanted to be in the world. Like at the time, because she's an adult now, they didn't have those front facing carriers. They were all like this. She hated that. And my husband would walk her around like with his hands around her middle, facing out, doing the like Titanic thing in the world, right? Just like on all the time. And she never slept, slept. And I, at the time, then it was literally cry it out or nothing. And I was like, well, I can't do that. Neurologically, physiologically, I can't do it. Number one. And number two, I knew she would just cry for hours and hours and she would never give up ever, ever. So I was like, well, why even try? And we were doing the whole attachment parenting thing because I was like, well, if I follow her cues and figure out who she is and what she needs and we'll just co-sleep because she's awake all the time, it'll all be great. And aspects of it were great. And yet it just didn't. It wasn't what Dr. Sears promised in the baby book. So when she was 5 months old, we went and had an appointment with him because his office was near my folks' house in Southern California. And we were like, what the heck, right? And at the time, he was writing his fussy baby book because he had probably, I think, 4 mellow kids, and his last one was a Livewire. And he himself discovered that they need a whole different perspective. So that put me just on this path of trying to understand sleep training advice, and and trying to figure out how not to crash the car because I was so tired. So it was a real path. Interestingly, Kim West, who's my co-author, the sleep lady, had her kids at exactly the same time and was discovering the same problems with sleep training. And that's how she came up with her approach that she then tested on her alert, sensitive kids. So it was interesting that we both had these parallel experiences and now are meeting to try to solve this problem, because it really hasn't changed. You're right. No. In all that time, there has not been a significant change in what parents are told, and also about just knowledge or information to parents about temperament, which is shocking to me.
It really is. It's so interesting. And we'll talk more about the book that you wrote with Kim West a little bit later. And I do find it so interesting that you were having these same issues 30 years ago that so many parents are now, and we just don't know, because I mean, I only had my first 7 years ago. Sounds very similar to yours. I always say that he came out with his eyes wide open, stared me right in the eyes, and was just so alert, would not sleep, colic, all those same things you described. And we actually did try sleep training because our pediatrician said it was the only way. Everyone in my mom's group said it's the only way. And we tried it. And we tried it when he was so little. He was like 4 months old. Never worked. It was just, it was honestly traumatic for all of us. And it was horrible. But like you said, there were no other options. Nobody was talking about temperament. So I would love, actually, if you could speak a little bit to what we actually mean when we say temperament. You use the term Livewire. There are all different terms. Some people call it orchid children, spirited children. You use the term Livewire. Why do you use that term?
Well, partly because, so just quickly, a lot of those terms, we're all talking about the same thing. It really is. It's that kid, like, you know him when you have him.
Yes, you know.
You know who that is. But highly sensitive kids, same. Fussy, spirited,
Dr. Sears said high needs.
High needs. 100%. It's all in the zone, or in the same ballpark. I just used Livewire. Partly, I liked it to be a noun, number one, but also my kids just seemed like they had more current running through their system at any given time. And that meant that the circuits would blow more easily. They just had a lot going through their brain, and then they would get fried by, little things. And I think that's pretty iconic of these kids, is it just doesn't take a lot. That's why orchid is good. I mean, that's an interesting metaphor, right? Like what they say is dandelions, they go dandelions versus orchids. Dandelions do pretty well wherever they're planted. They're pretty hardy. They can withstand a lot. Orchids need a very specific set of circumstances and a very skilled gardener, right? Like the gardener has to know what they're doing, because they need just the right humidity and just the right fertilizer and just the right light. It's easy for them not to get it, and then you're sunk, right? But if they do get it, kaboom, right? Like they're incredible. That's called, in the research, you probably know, called differential susceptibility to environment. That means that two kids in the same context can have very different experiences. So what is fine for a dandelion kiddo could be really disruptive for an orchid or a Livewire. And that's where we talk about the differences in sleep training, or the differences in sleep, period, right? It doesn't take a lot for a Livewire to not be able to sleep.
Right. Yeah. And I want to dive into sleep specifically too, because I know you've done so much research around this. But for anybody listening who maybe this is the first time they've heard of any of this or any of these terms, and they're like, oh my gosh, this sounds like my baby. What are some of the other signs or symptoms like that parents could look for early on, or maybe, maybe they even have a toddler now and they're like, oh, this sounds like maybe what I went through a couple years ago. And what are some of the things you would look for?
So what's funny is I hear the same things from parents. So it's almost like I've gotten this list of things that parents will say about their kids. So the one huge one is, either everything's a big deal or she'll go 0 to 100 in 2 seconds if I don't get to her fast. So there's no like, oh, if we wait, maybe she'll figure it out. Most of these parents are like, if I don't get in there right away, she's hysterical and it'll take forever to calm them down. So that's intensity and reactivity. So big feelings that happen very fast. And it's not just sad feelings, it's happy, it's all feelings. Everything's a big deal. The biggest one, very honestly, is when people will say, yeah, she just will not nap. It's like she has FOMO. Yeah. FOMO has become, for me, the password to get into the Livewire club, because that's all I need to know is a child who is so engaged in the world, wants to be awake, that they just don't want to sleep. Yeah, which is a great quality. It's just hard. He'll never give up, ever, just like we just said. Never give up. They will fights for what they want. They know what they want and how they want it, and they will fight for it, and they will outlast you. Yeah, that's a huge one. Perceptiveness. So the parents will say, he just doesn't miss a thing, picks up on every little thing. And that means changes in the environment, emotional, landscape, little things on the carpet, like really attuned to their environment. Yeah. And then the other big one is sensory sensitivity, which is harder for parents to really suss out, but boy, oh boy, that's like a driving force, I think, in all of it. Because if we think about temperament is the way we take in and process the world, not just outer world, but inner world as well. What's our machinery for experiencing the world? And our senses are how we take that stuff in. So if we think of these kids having are just more open, their channels are more open, it's really easy for them to get overwhelmed in a variety of ways. And sometimes it's really subtle. So understanding and being able to know about sensory sensitivity is just massive.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too. The sensory piece fascinates me so much, especially I was a special ed teacher before this life. I worked very closely with OTs, and my son went to occupational therapy too. And it's so interesting because I think a lot of people hear sensory sensitivity and they automatically assume, oh, they must hate loud noises, or, oh, they must hate like itchy fabrics and stuff. And that's all true, but it also can be those kids that just can't get enough sensory input, right? Like for my son, he used to just crash into us all the time.
Yes,
like I would be standing at the sink and he would just ram his body into me. He still will go up to my husband and just like slap him on the stomach or slap him on the back. We have a toddler, a 2-year-old, and ever since she was a baby, we've had to work very hard to make sure he doesn't squeeze her too tight, because he's just hugging her and loving her, and just sometimes it's a little too much. And so, so it's like these seeking behaviors and also the avoidant behaviors, right? Where it's like, oh my gosh, if there's a certain smell in the house, they'll flip out, or a loud sound or something unexpected. It's really hard for them to stay regulated. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see the sensory piece and how it plays out in different kids, because the sensitivity doesn't just mean one thing.
No. And you can have an accumulation of things. Right? Like you can have little things build up, and then one last little, spark lights the meltdown flame.
And you're like, what happened?
What happened? Really, I mean, honestly, it's a huge takeaway from this. If you have one of these kids, look up what sensory processing is, because it helps you understand that behavior. And go, oh, he's trying to get his needs met, his sensory needs met. Or he really hates the feeling of water on his skin, or air after being, like, getting out of the bath is a nightmare, because for them, that feeling of air on wet skin is just awful, right? Yeah. So if we understand it, we can work around it. And that I talk a lot in the book about that in terms of bedtime routines. Yes. Like, let's not do the things that make it harder.
Right, exactly. I say that all the time too, because parents are like, do we have to do a bath? Like my kid flips out and then it makes bedtime take so much longer. I'm like, please don't. Like do your bath in the morning or whenever else you need to. And we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, I want to talk more specifically about sleep because I think that piece is so important. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, it's post New Year's. We are out of that holiday season craziness, and I'm really looking forward to getting back into our regular routines, getting back to school. And this is one reason I love Thrive Market. My family and I have been using Thrive for, maybe 6+ years now. We are very loyal subscribers, and it helps us save so much money, but also so much time. We can order right from our app. We know what we want. We can fill our cart super quickly, and we can subscribe to the things we use most. So instead of really sugary snacks, we stock up on things like Simple Mills crackers, Chomps little beef sticks, Lesser Evil popcorn. My kids love the Annie's mac and cheese. We always have that on hand too. So on Thrive Market, you can use all of these different filters from gluten-free to dairy-free to kosher, and you can find all of these better options for your family for, dinner, pantry staples, school lunches, after school snacks, all of that stuff. Anything you're looking for, they have. So the best part is that everything gets shipped directly to your door. So you never have to worry about grocery aisles or, beating the crowds, taking your baby in and out of the car. It just makes it so easy from start to finish. So if you are ready for a junk-free start to 2025, head to thrivemarket.com/HeySleepyBaby and get 30% off your first order plus a $60 gift free. That's Thrive, THRIVE market.com/HeySleepyBaby. thrivemarket.com/HeySleepyBaby.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
We are back with McCall Gordon, and we are going to now dive into sleep a little bit more because this is something that, like you mentioned earlier, lots of parents just don't know, that we don't know how different approaches can work for better or for worse for different types of kids and temperaments. So you talked a little bit before about some of the signs that parents can look for to see if they have a Livewire or orchid or sensitive child. And what are some of the signs as far as sleep? So you mentioned these are the kids that often just do not sleep.
Oh, they don't.
Don't they also sometimes need more sleep? So it's like this paradox of like they need more sleep, but it's so hard to get them to sleep. So that's so frustrating for the parent.
Oh, 100%. I hear a lot from parents. They say, oh, my kid's low sleep needs. I'm like, probably not. They're just acting like it. Right?
Yeah. They just don't want to go to sleep, but they still need it. Yeah.
Right. Well, sleep is a big transition. Right? Yeah. So let me preface this by saying, even though we absolutely know that temperament directly impacts sleep, there's lots of research that says temperament impacts sleep. Virtually zero of the research on sleep training has taken temperament into account.
Yep.
Zero. In the research on sleep training, at least the cry it out approach doesn't work for between 25 and 50% of the people in the study. Yes.
Wow.
25 to 50%, it did not work. I think about 20 to 25% of kids are live wires. Wouldn't that be interesting to find out, right? Yeah. If those kids for whom that approach didn't work were all live wires.
Yep. It would make a lot of sense.
It would make a lot of sense, but we don't know that. None of the sleep books really talk about temperament. Almost none of them talk in a meaningful way. So parents have one of these kids and they go try the approaches like you said, and their experience is not at all like the books say. Yeah. And what most parents end up doing is saying, what am I doing wrong? What's the matter with me? What have I done? Right? Like they take it on themselves rather than say, that didn't work for my kid. They're wrong. Right? So we really see these parents who come to us, come to me for sure, beaten down. By the time they get to me, they just feel like they stink at parenting. And that's because the information isn't supportive or isn't written for the kid they have. Yeah. So what we have to think about is the way that temperament impacts sleep from just a organic frame of mind is you have to think of what it takes to fall asleep. And I always use the analogy of a red-eye flight. There's always those people that you see that lean back, they put their arms over their chest, and they're out and they're snoring.
Yeah.
I have never slept. No. I've never slept on an airplane, never, not once. No. It's like eye mask, earplugs, blanket, pillow, rest for my foot, whatever, melatonin. It never works because I can't buffer out. I can't buffer out everything that's going on, right? Mm-hmm. So when we go to fall asleep, first we have to get the signal from our body that we're tired. And I don't think these kids get that memo from their brain that they're tired. I just don't think they know.
Right.
So they don't get the signal, number one. Then you have to be able to disengage from whatever you're doing to turn toward that signal, which is also hard for them because they're so interested in the world. Then you have to be able to tune everything out and go to sleep. Okay, it's like 3 strikes. They can't do that either. So sleep just as a baseline is really hard for them. So when the advice says, oh, watch for sleepy signals and then get, it's like these kids don't have those.
No.
They don't.
Yeah.
And by the time they look actually tired, they are beyond. And then parents can't get them to sleep. So again, the deck is a little bit stacked against some of these things. We talked about the idea too, that when the cry it out stuff or the advice doesn't take temperament into account, it never speaks to how much crying there could be, right? Just like what you experienced. They don't say what to do if your kid's crying for 2 solid hours.
Yeah, which he did some nights. And, it's like you're doing the check-ins. And I remember even emailing the customer service of the program that I had purchased. And I was like, I don't know how I could possibly be messing this up because it seems pretty foolproof, but he's still crying for 2 hours at night. And we're doing the pop-ins that they said to do every 15 minutes or whatever. Yeah. But, all we could do is go in and reassure him with our voice. We couldn't touch him. We couldn't pick him up. Didn't make eye contact. It had to be my husband, not me, because if I went in, he would think he was getting fed. It's like, oh God, it's sickening to think about now. Yeah. But they basically told me that it was my fault and that I wasn't being consistent enough and that I should stop doing the pop-ins if it's making him so upset. And there's no plan B. And actually, instead of saying, oh, wow, it sounds like your child is really distressed, really dysregulated, let's dial it back. Instead of doing that, they say you need to ramp it up and you need to just stop going in and checking and just let the crying extinguish itself even more intensely. And it seems so backwards and so wrong. Well, there's no research to support doing that. So it's like, why is this such common advice? I don't know.
Well, it's the behavioral paradigm, right? It's behaviorism, which we have dropped in every other aspect of child rearing. Yep, we do not use this theory from the 1920s as it relates to children, except around sleep. It is the most bizarre thing to me. The idea that if you help, that's a bad thing. That there's there's no other area we do that. I tell parents, it's like, we don't give them a bike and a 2-wheeler and go, hey, I'll be over here. If I help you, you'll never learn. Right.
I always hear these crazy analogies. Like people say, oh, well, you teach your child to do everything else. You need to teach them how to sleep. And it's like, yeah, but let's think about potty training, for example. I don't throw my 1-year-old in the bathroom with a toilet and say, figure it out. Right. We help them until they're ready. And then when they're ready, we gently guide them. But I would never have them sitting in the bathroom crying, trying to figure out how to do it by themselves. It just seems so weird.
It's bonkers. And don't get me started on the research on side effects because that's just nuts. Well, we can talk about that another time. Yeah. Again, I'm sure you and I both want to, reassure people. it does not mean there are folks who use it and it really isn't a big deal and it only takes a couple of nights and it really isn't like intense crying. We're really talking about kids. Kim heard of somebody who with their intense kid, it was on like their second week and the baby stopped smiling during the day.
Oh my God, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah. So that's not okay. Or people are doing it with a 4-month-old who actually has reflux, undiagnosed reflux. Yep. I would also say, like, I love pediatricians, thank the Lord for them, but they get an average of 15 minutes of training on sleep.
Yeah.
So they're saying stuff maybe that they did or that they read or that they heard sometimes, and that's a whole other topic of why we need better investigation of problems, right?
Yeah.
That method just does not generally work with these kids. And it's a big ask for parents who have already been dealing with a lot of crying and meltdowns during the day. So the good news is we don't have to do that.
Right.
And we really don't have to do it. And there are ways of taking temperament into account and what these kids really need in order to be in the chute for sleep. And then we support them as we have them learn this new skill. And I find that it's a really great way, a great compromise to say, look, I've been bouncing you on this silly yoga ball every night. I know, the yoga ball. Again, another.
I wanted to slash mine once my son was. I had fantasies of taking a knife to it and just.
My son had to be in the hospital when he was 15 months because he had a flu and he was dehydrated. I took the ball to the hospial. Oh my God. Yeah, the nurses thought I was crazy. Yeah, the nurses thought I was crazy. But, to say, okay, I've been, you're 9 months old or whatever. I cannot bounce you on this yoga ball anymore. So we're going to do this new thing. It's new. You're going to hate it, but I'm going to be here for you. I'm right here, right next to you. I'm going to help you. I'm going to pick you up and calm you down if you get really freaked out, but we're going to learn this new skill. Mm-hmm. And I find that that's a really reasonable thing to do because most parents, are scared to make a change because they're afraid that they'll just make it worse and they cannot tolerate worse. Yes. And I really, really get that. Yeah.
And a lot of times, like the change that you're trying to make, like I teach courses about how to make, I call them like, it's called my Tender Transitions course. And I talk about how to kind of guide your child through learning a new way to fall asleep and supporting them the whole time, of course, but also preparing yourself and getting your mindset in a good place before you start, because sometimes it's harder. Sometimes you'll get a little bit less sleep at first. I do want to dive into this more. So we're going to take one more quick break and then we'll come back and talk about some of the sleep strategies that you give in the book. We'll be right back.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.
Okay, so we are back. Let's talk a little bit about your new book, Why Won't You Sleep? First, I would love to just hear, like, quickly, what inspired you to write this book? Was it just that you were frustrated with all the advice parents are getting?
Yes. And there was just, again, the whole sleep wars where it's cry it out versus co-sleeping or whatever. It leaves, there's a lot of, like, I always say that fight is going on between people for whom that thing worked. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole bunch of people in the middle who are just really struggling.
Because they don't want to do either one. Yeah, they don't want to co-sleep and they don't want to cry it out.
Yeah. Or they've tried both, right? Right. I was co-sleeping with my son and he was waking up every 45 minutes. And I think it was because he and I are both very light sleepers. And I think we were waking each other up.
Yeah,
that's
so hard.
I just felt like there was nobody talking to these parents in the language that they were living, right? Or that spoke to their lived experience in this situation. Because most people with a kid like this feel like they're the only ones that exist.
Yep.
The only ones in the world that exist. And it's because they're surrounded by people with mellower kids. And they're like, what is the matter with me? Why is this so weird, right? So I wanted to sort of do something to where we could talk to them all as a group and patch them up a little bit. So the first kind of part of the book, in a way, and then there's a chapter in the end, is all about the parent and saying, you haven't screwed this up. You've responded to the kid you have. This is harder. It's not your imagination. You're on a different path. So like you said, getting them in this new mindset and then talking about temperament, the child's and theirs. Because I don't know about you, but I learned a lot about my own temperament.
Yes, definitely. There is that genetic component there.
A little bit, yeah. And then we rule out physiological causes because there's a bunch of them. So we don't want you working on sleep training if your kid has, swollen adenoids.
Yes, I talk about this all the time. Yeah. So important. Yeah.
We rule that out. And then we make sure the child is old enough. That's okay. Now we've got the core folks that are really ready to go. And we walk them through this process that is present in the research. It's called parental fading. It's not bedtime fading. That's a different thing. It's parental fading, which basically means you give a lot of help at first, and then we just back that off over time. Again, think about it like riding a bike. At first, we got training wheels, and we take the training wheels off, and then we hold on to that seat for dear life. But we also don't keep holding on because otherwise they'll never learn about balance, right? So we test it out as they start figuring out what that feels like, and then we grab on again. And it's just like that. It's just like that. We're really there to make sure that child doesn't get dysregulated. We're there to support them and be present, but then we just back it off over time.
I love that.
That's pretty much it.
I love that.
That's the whole
simple,
process.
So simple. So can you talk maybe about some like simple changes that somebody listening, maybe they're, on their way to order your book at this very minute because they're like, yes, that's exactly what I need. But in the meantime, while they wait for, that Amazon delivery, what are some things that they can do like tonight to really just prime their child's nervous system for better sleep? Yeah.
Well, actually, the main thing, and this is possibly the best tip of all, get ahead of overtiredness. Almost all of the live wires that I see are not getting enough nap time, or they're awake for too many hours, or their bedtime is really late. Sometimes just getting out of that overtired cycle improves sleep dramatically. I had somebody recently, they were like, I didn't think it would do anything, and oh my God, they slept for so many hours or whatever. So know how long your child can stay awake for their age, and I guarantee you it's shorter than you think.
Yeah.
And don't wait for them to look tired. Go try for that nap. Any way you can. And then make sure bedtime is reasonably early. If they're up at 7 a.m, up to about almost school age, They should be in bed, lights out by 7 or 8 o'clock.
Yeah. A lot of times I'll share that my kids go to bed early and parents are like, wait, what? How do you get them to bed that early? And look, don't get me wrong. Low sleep needs is also very much a thing. It is very real. Lots of people just are lower sleep needs. So that is true. And at the same time, it's also true that a lot of parents assume, like we said at the beginning, that their child is low sleep needs simply because they won't go to sleep. And my son, my sensitive one, he's 7 and he still will sleep 12 hours a night. Like he is in bed at 7 o'clock, won't wake up until 6:30, sometimes 7 the next day, like 11 to 12 hours, like clockwork.
So
like he just still really needs that. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think that is really important. And it's always best to just assume they need more than you think. So if you're struggling with bedtime or struggling with naps, just start assuming it's overtiredness instead of undertiredness, right? Because you're not going to do any harm by trying to give them more sleep than they need.
Right. And these kids have a tiny little window. And if you miss it, it's like you've just given them coffee. And then they're wired. Yeah. So it's just a place to start. I like to say about low sleep needs that I think fewer kids are low sleep needs than people think, and that these kids just act like it. I think if we can get them a little bit more sleep, and again, it's just test it out.
Right, just try.
Say, what happens if I have them down, have my 6-month-old down for a nap by about 2 hours of having been awake? What happens? Is it easier? Do they sleep longer? Is the rest of the day better? Is bedtime better? If so, it's worth it. And you have
and sometimes you need to try it for a few days, right? So a lot of times parents will say, oh, it didn't work. I'm like, well, how long did you try it?
No,
you have to try for more than just a day usually.
It's not a one-to-one thing. But overtiredness, I think if most parents out there just got their kid, if they can, earlier bedtime, better nap time, shorter wake windows, it's massive. And then my big tip for slightly older kids, so 2.5, 3, because that's when all the bedtime shenanigans really start. And these smart kids, which we didn't say is in the mix, but I am positive it is. I'm positive these kids are smart, like really smart.
Yep.
Too smart, probably.
Yes. Too smart for me, that's for sure.
Yeah. You have to stay ahead of them. Is to lock that routine down. These kids, you almost have to be more rigid than with other kiddos, because these little guys will sense your wiggle room and they will hold you to it. So you have to be sure, you have to be clear, and you have to be more consistent than any human can be, because again, they really settle into structure. So for a bedtime routine, I say make a chart and make it like a contract. It's not for stickers. It's not for rewards. It's like, this is what happens at bedtime. Therefore, this is what doesn't happen, right? So they can't throw you a curveball. So make a chart and then go over it with them in the daytime. Here's what's going to happen tonight. Dad's going to do the routine tonight. And then I will say goodnight to you at the last hug. And then we're going to do this. And then we're going to do that. And then we're going to do this. And then when the lights go out, here's what's going to happen. Right. And then if you wake up in the middle of the night, here's what's going to happen. Like really, these kiddos hate surprises.
Yep. They need to know exactly what to expect.
Yeah. So I would say that's an easy one. That's an easy one to do, is the chart. And just give them massive heads ups about what's going to happen. Do not spring anything brand new on them.
Yes.
Oh, did I not tell you? No, don't do that.
No. Bedtime is not the time for new changes or talking about it earlier in the day and using visuals and stuff like that is such a good tip. I actually have a freebie too. I'll link it in the show notes, like a free template for creating a little bedtime chart and schedule and stuff like that. Because that is so helpful. I mean, my kids, I say it all the time, like we struggle with a lot of stuff in our house, like getting out the door for school is a nightmare, but bedtime is something that we just have on lock. It is zero stress. My kids love going to bed. It's arguably the easiest part of our day, but it's because our schedule is like clockwork. It is always the exact same things in the same order. They know exactly what to expect. And that just works. So, flexibility sometimes, but for the bedtime routine with these types of kids, it's definitely nice to be a little more prescriptive.
Yeah, and if they ask for something, if they're like, I'm hungry, I want a banana, and you're like, okay, great. If I say yes, now that's on the table as a thing.
Right.
And if I say no, there's going to be a meltdown. So you lose.
Right. So you have to prepare ahead of time for that.
You have to prepare. And the chart, I say the chart at least gives you a place to run to. So you can say, ooh, banana, let me check the chart. Banana, banana, banana. Oh, I don't see a banana. Oh, silly chart. Like, right? You don't you don't have to make that decision on the fly.
Right. I love that. I love that idea of blaming the chart too. That's so good. Kids will think that's hilarious too. This has been so helpful. I would love to hear just a couple words of wisdom as someone who has been through this before we end. So the first thing, what would you say to an exhausted parent who just feels like they are never going to sleep again?
Well, first of all, you didn't cause this. This is your child, and it's going to look like nothing's working, but it totally is. I think these kids don't give you wins in the moment. You're laying foundations, and you just have to believe that they're there, because they are. And so really give yourself a lot of self-compassion is massive, and give yourself a lot of credit for how hard you are trying. The other piece, if they're, really exhausted about sleep, is we can move the needle in a way that makes sense for your kid and makes sense for you and is really tolerable. So it is possible with these little ones. We just have to do it in a way that really understands what you're up against, because it's a lot. It's a lot. It is a lot. Yeah.
I love that you mentioned that too, because it's so true that and it's like what you talked about at the beginning with the differential susceptibility model, which is like we are putting in so much work. And if we do, these kids are going to end up incredible. They're going to be these incredible beings with so many wonderful qualities. And yeah, it's a lot of work up front, and it doesn't always give you that immediate reward, but it's there.
Yeah, and they really, it's not because something's wrong with them that they need more help with regulation. That whole self-soothing thing, I hear it from parents. Oh, my kid won't self-soothe. Well, first of all, that's a whole
other thing.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. But these kids do need more help, and if we think about the Livewire idea, I say, for example, if I gave you a 10 or 15 pound bag of sugar and said, can you hold this for 10 minutes? You'd probably be like, oof, okay, sure, I can hold it. If I gave you a 100-pound bag, you'd drop it immediately. And it's not because you're not strong. It's just a bigger thing. And that's how these kids are. They have a lot going on. And our help or our assistance with regulation is not a sign of weakness or deficit. It just means they have more to manage, and we're going to be there for them to help them when it's too much. Yeah. And that's a lifelong journey right there.
Yeah, that's parenting. That doesn't
end with sleep. Yeah.
No, that's parenting. Someone messaged me just this morning, and she's like, oh, I'm dreading going home because my grandparents are constantly telling me that I'm holding my baby too much and that they're going to rely on me forever because I'm holding them. And I'm like, oh my God, how old is your baby? And she said 2 months. I'm just like, oh my God. We're not allowed to hold the newborns anymore, or they're going to be too dependent on us. It's just,
yeah, that's when I use another analogy. I say, look, because I hear that all the time as well. I work on a telehealth platform, so I get tons and tons and tons of new parents. And they're like, oh, I know, it's so bad. I'm nursing my baby to sleep. I know I'm not supposed to, the 6-week-old or something. And I'm like, God. Okay, look, this whole idea of saying they need to learn to self-soothe would be like me telling you right now that you better work on those walking skills. Because if you keep carrying your baby, they'll never learn to walk. And we'd be like, you're crazy. My baby cannot walk right now. That's not even remotely possible. It's the same thing. Your baby also can't self-regulate and won't be able to for years. It's years. It's not months. So yeah, we're all backwards.
Yeah, no. And it's so interesting too, because, the gentle parenting and stuff like that is so popular now. All of these parents really buying into, supporting their child's emotions and validating them and helping them through those tough moments and tantrums and stuff. And it's like, why is it okay for us to do that? Why is it good for us to do that for 2, 3, 4-year-olds? And then for infants, for some reason, we're supposed to just leave them to cry to figure it out. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's so,
there's a lot
just so backwards.
It doesn't make sense. And at the same time, just real quick, I also see parents with these intense kids who are really afraid to, set some limits. Right. And that's where I was, right? Like I said, I'm just going to follow cues. I'm going to follow cues. And I say I followed their cues right off a cliff because I was not, I didn't know where the line was where to say, okay, too far. I can't do this piece anymore. And so sometimes I have to work with parents to say, you cannot continue to work this hard all through the night. You have to ask your child to pony up a little bit. So
setting those boundaries
survive.
is okay too. Yeah,
okay.
No, exactly. It's such a balance. And I think a lot of parents, like you said, are just afraid to follow those instincts, either for, one side or the other, where they're doing either too much or not enough. And it can be really hard to know where that line is.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And parental burnout is real in this group. I don't know if you read, but I did a quick survey of, I admin 2 very big Facebook groups of Livewire spirited kids. And what we expect for parental burnout is about 9% of parents in the U.S. are in burnout. In this group, it was
I would guess it was much higher.
Yeah, in this group, it was 75%.
Whoa.
75% were in active burnout.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. So that idea of make sure you're, as much as you can, making sure that you take care of you a little bit, because burnout is serious. And it's just easy to get there with these
100%,
kids. So,
wow.
Yeah.
What is something no one told you before you became a parent that you wish you had known?
It's not intuitive.
Yeah.
It's not intuitive. And especially with these kids.
Yeah.
It's not intuitive. I mean, there are pieces, but I thought, I'll just know what to do. No. And I think it's gotten worse, honestly. I think it's gotten worse in terms of the tone. I tell lots of parents with these kids, I hate to say it, step away from Instagram. Like,
100%.
Really put yourself on an information diet, because all of the information is geared towards saying you don't know what to do. And I'm going to tell you. And then parents don't trust themselves. Yes. But still, I just thought it would come super naturally. No. I'm still waiting for that.
I know. Same. Well, McCall, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I love your work so much. Where can people find the book? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, the book is available now everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, all those places. Hooray. If you get the book and like it, please review it. That really helps. And then all my handles are Little Livewires. So Instagram, TikTok, my website, Little Livewires, Facebook, all of that.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining. I know that this conversation is going to make so many parents feel so much better, so I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I love it.
Hey friends, if you're facing divorce, thinking about it, or navigating the chaos it can bring, I've got something just for you. I'm Kate Anthony, and I host the New York Times recommended The Divorce Survival Guide podcast, your one-stop resource for surviving and thriving through divorce. Each week, we dive into everything from emotional healing and co-parenting to legal strategies and starting over. You'll hear from top experts, powerful guest stories, and maybe a little tough love along the way. Because divorce, it's hard, but you don't have to do it alone. This isn't just about getting through it. It's about rebuilding and reclaiming your life on the other side. Whether you're in the middle of a messy split or planning your next chapter, I've got your back. So hit that follow button and join me on the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, because survival isn't the end, it's just the beginning.